In the shadow of the Rockies, where winter's breath turned men to stone, Silas Morgan built his solitary life. Calloused hands, weathered face, eyes that had forgotten how to smile, he was as much a part of the mountain as the pines themselves. Then came the day he found her diary, tucked beneath loose floorboards in the general store, where Emma Winters worked. His name filled pages, never meant for his eyes, alongside drawings of a cabin, wildflowers in mason jars, and 3 small pairs of boots by a doorway. His heart, long frozen, cracked like spring ice on the river. Would the lone wolf of Timber Creek finally find his way home? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mountain didn't care if a man was cold. That was the first lesson Silas Morgan learned when he arrived in Timber Creek 7 winters ago. The second lesson was that silence could be a man's best companion. He'd mastered both teachings well. Dawn broke over the Rockies with a pale, hesitant light. Silas had been awake for hours, tending the embers in his stone hearth, letting the familiar routine of survival push away the remnants of dreams he'd rather forget. His cabin sat nestled among towering pines, a half-mile from the town proper, close enough for necessity, distant enough for peace. Another day, he muttered to no one, his breath visible in the cold air. He reached for his rifle, an old Spencer that had seen him through the war and the years after. Its weight was comforting, familiar, like the hand of an old friend. The town of Timber Creek wasn't much. A general store, a saloon that doubled as an inn, a small church, and a scattering of homes built by folks hardy enough to endure mountain winters. But it was enough. People nodded respectfully when Silas passed, but they didn't press for conversation. His reputation as a tracker and hunter preceded him when game was scarce. It was Silas Morgan who kept bellies from going empty. The bell above the general store door announced his arrival with a cheerful jingle that seemed at odds with the man himself. Emma Winters looked up from where she was arranging jars of preserved fruit, her smile brightening the dim interior. "Mr. Morgan," she said, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Right on time." Silas nodded, removing his worn leather hat. Miss Winters. Emma was the daughter of the store's owner, Harold Winters, who had taken ill last fall and never quite recovered. Now she ran things with an efficiency that impressed even Silas. She was 30, unmarried, a fact the town gossips never tired of discussing, and possessed a quiet strength that reminded him of the mountain itself. "Your order came in yesterday," she said, disappearing into the back room. "Pat said to tell you he found those special rifle cartridges you were asking after." Silas waited, his eyes wandering over the shelves, stocked with necessities for mountain living. The store smelled of coffee beans, leather, and the faint sweetness of candy kept in glass jars by the register. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and unhurried. Emma returned with a wooden crate. "There's something else," she said, her voice lowered even though they were alone in the store. "Riders came through yesterday, 3 of them, asked about the pass to the north." Silas frowned. "This time of year, pass is nearly impassable, that's what Pa told them." She bit her lower lip, a gesture he'd noticed she made when worried. "They didn't look like trappers or prospectors. One had a scar here." She traced a line from her left eye down her cheek. "Outlaw band's been moving north since the railroad started pushing west." Silas said, more to himself than to her. "Sheriff no, Sheriff Taylor's down with the influenza. Half the town is." Her eyes met his, steady and clear. "People are talking about you, Mr. Morgan, about your time during the war." Silas stiffened. He'd never spoken of those days, but small towns had long memories, and rumors traveled like wildfire in winter when there was little else to do but talk. "People talk too much," he said, reaching for the crate. Their fingers brushed as she helped him lift it, and for a moment something passed between them, an awareness perhaps, or a question unasked. Emma stepped back quickly, smoothing her apron. "I've been meaning to ask," she said, changing the subject, "if you might check the roof of the church before Sunday services. Pastor Williams is worried about the weight of the snow." "I'll see to it," Silas promised, already calculating the time it would take, the tools he'd need. As he turned to leave, balancing the crate against his hip, Emma called out softly, "Mr. Morgan?" He paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. "Stay warm out there." It wasn't until he was halfway home, the snow falling more heavily now, that Silas realized he was smiling. The expression felt foreign on his face, like a language long forgotten. The mountain didn't care if a man was cold, that much was true. But perhaps there were those in Timber Creek who did. The nightmares always came with the snow. Silas woke in darkness, sheets damp with sweat, despite the cold. For a moment he was back there. The smell of gunpowder, the screams of men, the blood freezing on his hands. He sat up, forcing air into his lungs, reminding himself where he was, Timber Creek. His cabin, 1876. The war long over. Moonlight spilled through frost-edged windows as he crossed to the trunk at the foot of his bed. It contained the few possessions he'd deemed worth keeping. Beneath spare clothing and ammunition lay a small wooden box he rarely opened. Inside, nestled in faded cloth, was a tarnished medal, the only evidence of Lieutenant Silas Morgan, decorated twice for valor, broken once by horror. "Not tonight," he murmured, closing the trunk. Some ghosts were best left undisturbed. Sunday morning brought clear skies and Silas to the church roof. Pastor Williams stood below, hands clasped anxiously, as Silas cleared snow and tested beams. "The Lord provides in mysterious ways, Mr. Morgan," the pastor called up. "When you arrived 7 years ago, few thought you'd stay through winter. Now I can't imagine Timber Creek without you." Silas grunted, hammering a loose board. "Job needed doing." "Indeed, as does Emma Winters' situation." Silas paused mid-swing. "Miss Winters doesn't strike me as needing help." "Not help, perhaps. Company?" The pastor smiled. "Harold worries for her future. A woman alone has hard prospects in these mountains." "She mazes fine," Silas replied, returning to his work with unnecessary force. "Managing isn't living, son." Church bells soon summoned the faithful. Silas, having finished the repairs, intended to slip away before services began. He nearly collided with Emma at the church steps. "You're not staying?" she asked, wrapped in a blue woolen coat that brought out the color of her eyes. "Got traps to check." "Of course." She held his gaze a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for fixing the roof. Pastor says you refused payment." Silas shrugged. "Community matters need tending. Still, you should join us sometime. Your voice would add nicely to the hymns." He raised an eyebrow. "Been listening to me sing, Miss Winters?" A blush crept into her cheeks. "When you think no one's listening, your voice carries on the mountain air." She hesitated. "Pa's asking after you. Says it's been too long since you've had a proper Sunday dinner." The invitation hung between them, weighted with meaning Silas wasn't ready to examine. "Another time, perhaps," he said finally. Something like disappointment flickered across her face before she composed herself. "The invitation stands. Pa enjoys your company and—" She stopped, then added more quietly, "We both do." Silas watched her disappear into the church, troubled by the warmth her words kindled. Attachments were dangerous. They led to expectations, disappointments, loss. He'd learned that lesson well. Harold Winters was waiting when Silas returned to the store 3 days later with fresh game. Despite his illness, the older man insisted on sitting in the storeroom, going through ledgers while Emma tended customers. "There's my mountain man," Harold wheezed, gesturing to a chair. "Sit, tell me what's happening beyond these 4 walls." Silas described the game trails, the weather patterns, everything except the riders Emma had mentioned. Harold seemed to read his omission. "She told me about the strangers," he said, closing his ledger. "You're worried." "Cautious," Silas corrected. Harold studied him with eyes still sharp, despite his frail body. Emma writes in that diary of hers every night, has since she was a girl. Says it helps her think. Silas stiffened, wondering why Harold was telling him this. She's like her mother, keeps everything locked inside until it spills onto paper. Harold coughed, a rattling sound. A woman needs someone who listens, Silas. Even when the words aren't spoken aloud. I'm not. I know what you're not, Harold interrupted gently. I'm just saying what she might need. Later, as Silas left with supplies, he caught sight of Emma through the store window. She was writing in a leather-bound book, her face softened in the lamplight. She paused, glanced out the window, and for a moment their eyes met. She smiled, a private thing, before returning to her pages. Silas turned toward home, unsettled by the thought of what words she might be committing to paper. Words perhaps about him. A week of bitter cold kept most of Timber Creek indoors. When Emma sent word about loose floorboards behind the store counter, Silas welcomed the task. He arrived early, tools in hand, to find her sorting mail. "Mr. Morgan," she greeted him, relief evident in her voice. "I was beginning to think the mountain had swallowed you. Takes more than cold to do that." He stamped snow from his boots. "Show me these boards." Emma led him behind the counter, where several planks had warped, creating an uneven surface. "Pa nearly fell yesterday. With his health." She didn't finish the thought. Silas knelt, examining the damage. "I'll need to pull them up, replace the worst ones. Whatever's necessary. I've cleared the area for you to work." She hesitated. "There's coffee when you're ready." Left alone, Silas worked methodically, prying up the first board with careful precision. The second came loose more easily, revealing the crossbeams beneath and something else. Tucked against a support beam was a leather-bound book. Silas paused, carpenter's hammer suspended mid-air. This must be Emma's diary. Harold's words echoed in his mind. She writes in that diary of hers every night. He should ignore it, replace the boards and pretend he'd seen nothing. That would be the honorable thing. But his fingers were already reaching for the book, drawn by a curiosity he couldn't name. He glanced toward the doorway, listening for Emma's footsteps. Hearing nothing, he opened the diary to a random page. The neat, flowing script was unmistakably feminine. His eyes caught his own name, and before he could reconsider, he was reading, "Watched Mr. Morgan from the window today as he split wood behind the church. There's a grace to his movements despite his size, like a dancer who doesn't know he's dancing. I wonder if he ever thinks of me, beyond our transactions at the store. Pears says I'm being foolish, but the heart wants what it wants." Silas felt heat rise in his neck. He should stop reading immediately, but his eyes continued down the page. Dreamt again of the cabin, our cabin, with the blue door and the porch facing the sunrise. 3 pairs of small boots by the door. 2 boys and a girl, I think. I can almost hear their laughter. Would Silas be a stern father or gentle? Both, I imagine. Stern in lessons that matter, gentle in moments that count. His heart hammered against his ribs. 3 children. She had imagined 3 children with him. A family. A life together. The sound of a cup settling onto a saucer in the next room jolted him back to reality. Hastily, he returned the diary to its hiding place, positioning it exactly as he'd found it. He was replacing the floorboard when Emma returned. "How's it coming?" she asked, setting a steaming mug near his tools. "Fine," he managed, not trusting himself to meet her eyes. "Just fine." He worked in silence for the next hour, hyper-aware of Emma moving about the store, greeting customers, managing inventory. Each time she smiled at him, he wondered what thoughts lay behind that smile, what hopes she had penned about him, about them, in pages never meant for his eyes. By mid-afternoon the floor was repaired. Silas gathered his tools, still avoiding direct eye contact. "What do I owe you?" Emma asked. "Nothing." His voice sounded strange to his own ears. "Community matter. You say that about everything you do for me, for the store," she corrected quickly, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Silas nodded, desperate to escape before he betrayed himself. Be careful with those boards for a few days. Wood needs to settle. Mr. Morgan, she called, as he reached the door. Are you well? You seem distracted. He forced himself to look at her, then really look at her. Auburn hair neatly pinned back, clear blue eyes watching him with concern, hands clasped before her, hands that had written dreams of a life with him, of children with him. Just tired, he lied. Winter makes for poor sleep. Well, don't be a stranger. Her smile was warm, genuine. P keeps asking when you'll join us for dinner. Soon, he promised, suddenly meaning it. Outside, the cold air cleared his head somewhat. Silas walked home in a daze, his mind replaying the words he'd read. You want 3 kids with me? The thought was terrifying, exhilarating, impossible. And yet, as he stared into his empty cabin that evening, the silent rooms, the solitary chair by the fire, the single plate on his table, something inside him shifted, like ice beginning to thaw after a long winter. Word traveled fast in Timber Creek. Within 2 days of Silas fixing the store floor, Sheriff Taylor, still weak from influenza, but back on his feet, knocked on his cabin door. Riders are back, the sheriff said without preamble. 5 of them now. Silas invited him in, poured coffee. Same one, according to Jennings over at the saloon, scarred man still leading them. Taylor spread a hand-drawn map of the mountain passes on the table. They're asking specific questions about the town, about supply shipments. He tapped a location with his finger. And about this pass here. Silas studied the map. Someone had marked several mountain trails with red ink, including the narrow gap that led directly to Timber Creek's northern approach. That's not public knowledge, Silas observed. That trail doesn't appear on standard maps. Exactly. Taylor coughed, a reminder of his recent illness. Someone's been feeding them information, detailed information, or they've scouted extensively. Silas traced the markings. These are accurate. Too accurate. That's why I'm here. Taylor looked uncomfortable. Town council's called a meeting tonight. They want you there. I don't involve myself in town affairs. This is different. These men, they're not just passing through, they're planning something. Taylor's voice dropped. And with half the men still sick, including most of my deputies, he left the implication hanging. Silas remained silent, thinking of Emma, of Harold, of the diary hidden beneath the floorboards. I'll come, he said finally. The town hall was crowded despite the cold. Silas stood at the back, uncomfortable with the attention his entrance attracted. Emma was near the front, with Harold, who sat wrapped in blankets, despite the room's warmth. She caught Silas's eye and gave a small nod. Mayor Collins called the meeting to order. Sheriff Taylor has informed us of a potential threat to our community. In light of our current, diminished capacity, we need to discuss precautions. Taylor explained about the riders, their questions, the marked map. Murmurs of concern spread through the crowd. What do they want? Someone called out. The spring payroll, Harold Winters answered, his voice frail but clear. Pacific Northwest Mining Company sends gold through here first week of spring when the pass is clear. They've done it for years. Silas shifted, pieces falling into place. How much? Enough to make 5 men rich, Harold said. Or arm an entire outlaw band. The meeting dissolved into arguments about how to prepare, what to do, whether to send for help. Help won't come in time, the mayor concluded. We need to prepare ourselves. All eyes turned to Silas. Mr. Morgan, Collins said, I understand you have experience in these matters. The room went quiet. Silas felt the weight of expectation pressing down. I can show men how to defend what's theirs, he said carefully. Nothing more. That's all we're asking, the mayor replied. When the meeting concluded, Emma approached Silas as he prepared to leave. You'll help us then? She asked. I'll do what I can. She touched his arm briefly. Thank you. It means a lot to the town. She hesitated. To me. Harold joined them, moving slowly with his cane. Come by the store tomorrow, Silas. I have something to show you." Later that night, alone in his cabin, Silas cleaned his Spencer rifle with practiced hands. The familiar routine usually calmed him, but tonight his thoughts kept returning to Emma's face at the meeting, the concern in her eyes, the gentle pressure of her fingers on his arm, and the diary, those private dreams of a shared life, now complicated by real danger. He'd spent years avoiding entanglements, responsibilities beyond his own survival. Yet here he was, preparing to defend a town, people who looked to him for protection, people who had begun to matter. Outside, snow fell in thick, silent curtains. Silas stood at his window, watching the white expanse grow between his cabin and the distant lights of Timber Creek. Tomorrow he would cross that distance. Tomorrow he would step into a role he'd sworn never to take again. Leader, protector, soldier, for the town, he told himself. But as he pictured Emma's blue eyes and the trust they held, he knew it wasn't just for Timber Creek. It was for her, for the dream she'd written about in her hidden diary, a dream he couldn't admit, even to himself, that he was beginning to share. Harold was alone when Silas arrived at the store the next morning. The older man sat behind the counter, a small wooden box open before him. "Emma's making deliveries to those still sick," Harold explained, gesturing to the chair opposite. "Sit, please." Silas did so, noting the increased pallor in Harold's face. "You should be resting. Plenty of time for that later." Harold smiled weakly. "I wanted to speak with you privately." He pushed the wooden box toward Silas. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, lay a woman's gold wedding ring, its single diamond catching the morning light. "Catherine's," Harold said softly. "Emma's mother. 32 years we had together before the fever took her." Silas looked at the ring, uncertain why Harold was showing him this. "I always thought Emma would wear it someday," Harold continued. "That I'd see it on her hand before I joined Catherine." He closed the box with careful fingers. "Time's running short for that hope." "You're going to recover," Silas said firmly. Harold waved away the reassurance. "This illness is just finishing what time started." "But that's not why I asked you here." He leaned forward. "These men coming, they're dangerous, aren't they?" "Yes. And you know how to deal with such men. From the war." Silas's jaw tightened. "Those days are behind me." "Are they?" Harold's eyes, though clouded with age, were sharp. "The way you stand, the way you assess a room, the nightmares Emma says you never speak of but everyone knows you have. The war may be over, but it's still with you." Silas remained silent. "I'm not judging," Harold added gently, "just observing that perhaps the skills you acquired then might serve a purpose now, protecting something worthwhile." The bell above the door jingled as Emma entered, arms laden with empty baskets. Her face brightened, seeing Silas. "You came," she said, setting down her burdens. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan." "Miss Winters." He stood, oddly formal in her presence, since discovering the diary. "How are the Petersons?" Harold asked. "Improving. Mrs. Peterson sent her cornbread as thanks." Emma moved behind the counter, straightening items. "What have you two been discussing so seriously?" Harold closed his hand over the ring box. "Just reminiscing." Emma raised an eyebrow but didn't press. "Will you stay for lunch, Mr. Morgan?" "Nothing fancy, just stew." Before Silas could decline, Harold answered, "He will, and afterward he can help you with the inventory. My eyes aren't what they used to be for counting." Emma looked surprised but pleased. "That would be helpful." "Trapped." Silas nodded his agreement. He spent the afternoon beside Emma, counting supplies, recording figures in her precise ledger, and trying not to think about the words she had written about him, about them. Each time their hands brushed, each time she smiled at him, the knowledge of her diary hung between them, a secret only he carried. "You're good with numbers," she observed, as they worked, necessary skill in the quartermaster corps. "Is that where you served?" "You never speak of it." Silas hesitated. "For a time, then scouting, reconnaissance. Behind enemy lines." She stopped writing, watching him. "Sometimes That explains a lot. When he looked quizzical, she added, "Why the town looks to you now. They sense what you've seen, what you know. What I know," he said quietly, "is that preparation matters more than bravery when facing danger." By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered over the mountains. Emma glanced worriedly at the window. "Snow's coming. You should head back before it gets worse." Silas nodded, gathering his coat. Harold had retired to his room hours earlier, leaving them alone with the comfortable silence that had developed between them. "Miss Morgan," Emma said as he reached the door. Silas, his given name, sounded different in her voice. "Will you teach me to defend myself if needed?" The request surprised him. "The men and I will handle any trouble. And if you can't," her gaze was steady, "I won't be helpless, not if." She stopped herself. "I need to know I can protect what matters." In that moment, with her chin raised and determination in her eyes, Silas saw beyond the shopkeeper's daughter. He saw strength, resolve, a woman who had written of a future with him yet was prepared to fight for her own survival. "Tomorrow," he agreed. "Early, before the store opens." She smiled, relief evident. "Thank you." Walking home through the first flakes of snow, Silas contemplated the day's revelations. Harold's declining health, the wedding ring meant for Emma, her request to learn self-defense, and underlying it all, the diary's contents, changing how he saw her with each interaction. "You want 3 kids with me." The thought returned unbidden, and for the first time he didn't immediately push it away. The arrival of Dr. Bennett was unexpected but fortuitous. The traveling physician came with his wagon of medicines, his worn leather medical kit, and news from settlements to the south. 3 towns hit in the past month, he told the gathered townspeople after examining those still recovering from influenza. Same pattern each time. 5 riders scout, then 20 more appear. They take what they want and leave nothing but ashes. Silas stood at the back of the saloon, where the impromptu meeting had formed. He watched Emma's face pale at the doctor's words. "You're certain it's the same group?" Sheriff Taylor asked. "Descriptions match." Bennett opened his medical kit, removing a bottle of tonic for Harold, who sat wheezing beside Emma. "Leader with a scar down his left cheek, calls himself the Colonel, though no proper military man would behave so." Silas stiffened. The description stirred something in his memory, a name, a face from years ago. "Timber Creek isn't defenseless," Mayor Collins declared. "We're organizing, preparing." "Under Mr. Morgan's guidance," Emma added, her eyes finding Silas in the crowd. Doc Bennett followed her gaze, his expression changing as he studied Silas. "Morgan? Lieutenant Silas Morgan, of the 7th Cavalry Scouts." The room went silent. Silas neither confirmed nor denied, but his lack of response was answer enough. "Well," the doctor said softly, "perhaps Timber Creek stands a better chance than I thought." Later, as Silas helped Emma inventory medical supplies from Bennett's wagon, the doctor approached. "I was at Shiloh," Bennett said without preamble. "Field hospital. They brought in what was left of your unit after that reconnaissance mission went south." He studied Silas's impassive face. "Never expected to find you here, Lieutenant." "I'm not a lieutenant anymore," Silas replied sharply. "Haven't been for a long time." Emma looked between them, curiosity evident, but remained silent. "Of course," Bennett seemed to understand the boundaries. "Well, I'm glad to find you well, and I suspect Timber Creek is fortunate to have you." He handed Emma a jar of ointment. "For your father. It should ease his breathing." That evening, Emma insisted on walking partway home with Silas after they'd danced organizing the supplies. "You never told me you were an officer," she said as they passed the church. "It doesn't matter now. It matters to the town, to those who look to you for protection." She paused. "To me." Silas stopped walking. In the fading light, Emma's face was half in shadow, her eyes reflecting the last golden rays of sunset. "What happened?" she asked softly. "During the war?" "What happens in any war?" he answered, his voice low. "Men follow orders. Men die, some by enemy hands, some by poor decisions. He looked away. Sometimes those decisions were mine. Emma stepped closer. And you carry that still? It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. Every day. Is that why you chose this life? Alone in the mountains? Seemed fitting. One man's choices affecting only himself. Her hand touched his arm, light as a snowflake. But that's not true anymore, is it? You've become part of us, part of Timber Creek. Before he could respond, she continued, I've seen how the men listen when you speak, how the children watch you from windows when you pass. You may have come here to be alone, but you've become something else to us. Something necessary, something necessary. The words echoed in his mind as he completed the walk home alone. Is that what he'd become? Necessary to a town, to its people? To Emma? The next morning he began teaching her, as promised. They met in the storage room behind the store, where he showed her how to break a hold, where to strike an attacker, how to use her smaller size to advantage. Like this, she asked, practicing a movement to escape a grip on her wrist. Faster, he instructed, and don't hesitate. Hesitation gets you killed. She nodded, concentrating, then executed the move perfectly, twisting away from his grasp with surprising strength. Good, he said, unexpectedly proud. Again, they texted for an hour before the store needed opening. Emma was a quick study, focused and determined. When they finished, she was flushed, breathing hard. A strand of auburn hair escaped from its pins. Thank you, she said, pushing the hair back, for not treating me as if I'd break. You're stronger than you look, he replied. It was the simple truth. Her smile transformed her face, and for a moment, Silas glimpsed what Harold must see. Not just his daughter, but a woman of remarkable resilience. Tomorrow? She asked. Tomorrow, he agreed. As he left, he noticed Dr. Bennett watching from across the street, a knowing expression on his face. The doctor raised his hand in greeting, then tapped the side of his medical bag, a reminder of shared history, of men who had survived while others hadn't, of responsibility that never truly ended, no matter how far into the mountains a man might run. Sunday dinner, Harold announced when Silas delivered venison to the store on Saturday. No excuses this time. Emma's making her mother's stew. Silas glanced at Emma, who was pretending great interest in straightening canned goods on a shelf. Her cheeks held a faint blush. It's just a simple meal, she said, not meeting his eyes. Nothing special. Catherine's recipes are always special, Harold insisted. He pressed a worn, leather-bound book into Emma's hands. Show him the book, Emma. Your mother's legacy. Emma held the recipe book carefully, its pages yellowed with age, corners softened by decades of use. Ma started this when she married Pa. Every special occasion, every family recipe, she taught me from it. She opened to a page marked with a faded ribbon. This is the venison stew. It seems fitting, since you provided the main ingredient. Something in her tentative smile made refusal impossible. I'd be honored, Silas said. Sunday arrived clear and cold. Silas spent extra time shaving, even found a clean shirt that wasn't patched. At the small mirror above his wash basin, he hardly recognized himself, face smooth, hair combed, eyes different somehow, less haunted. The winter's living quarters above the store were modest but warm. Delicious aromas filled the small space: venison stew, fresh bread, apple pie. Harold sat in a cushioned chair near the stove, looking better than he had in weeks. The prodigal mountain man arrives, he said cheerfully. Emma emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. She'd done something different with her hair. Silas noticed. It was partly down, soft waves framing her face. You clean up well, Mr. Morgan, she said with a small smile. As do you, Miss Winters. Harold chuckled. Perhaps we could dispense with formalities over dinner. Silas and Emma would do just fine at my table. Dinner was unlike anything Silas had experienced in years. The stew was rich and flavorful, the bread still warm, the conversation easy. Harold shared stories of Timber Creek's early days, of meeting Catherine at a harvest dance, of Emma as a determined child who insisted on helping in the store before she could reach the counter. She'd stand on a crate, Harold recalled fondly, so serious about getting the inventory right. "Pear," Emma protested, but her eyes shone with affection. "It's true, just as serious as she is now with that diary of hers, writing every night since she was 12. Silas tensed slightly at the mention of the diary, but Emma didn't seem to notice. "It helps me make sense of things," she said simply. As Emma served apple pie, Harold asked Silas about his cabin. "Must get lonesome up there." "I'm accustomed to it," Silas replied. "Being accustomed to something doesn't mean it's good for you," Harold observed. "Take it from a man who's seen more winters than he has left. Solitude has its purpose, but a life needs more." After dinner, Harold claimed fatigue and retired to his room, leaving Silas and Emma to clean up. They worked in comfortable silence, her washing dishes, him drying. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for coming today. It means a lot to Kospra." "And to you?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. She paused, hands in the dishwater. "Yes," she admitted softly. "To me as well." When the kitchen was tidy, Emma walked Silas to the door. Night had fallen, stars sharp as glass shards in the black sky. "I should check the northern pass tomorrow," Silas said. "Scout the area, see if there's any sign of those riders." Concern crossed Emma's face. "Alone? Best that way. One man moves quietly, leaves less trace. Be careful," her voice dropped. "Come back safely." The simple request carried weight. Someone waiting for his return, concerned for his safety. It had been a very long time. "I will," he promised. For a moment, they stood close in the doorway. Neither moved. Silas could smell the lavender in her hair, see the pulse at her throat. If he leaned forward just slightly, "Good night, Silas," she whispered, using his given name for the first time. "Good night, Emma." Walking home under the stars, Silas found himself replaying the evening, the warmth of the small apartment, Harold's stories, Emma's smile. For years, he'd convinced himself he needed nothing beyond his solitary existence. Now, he wasn't so certain. At dawn, he left for the northern pass, rifle across his back, provisions for 2 days, the familiar routine of tracking, observing, moving silently through terrain came back easily. By midday, he'd found what he feared: fresh tracks of 5 horses, a campsite less than a day old, scraps of a map left in ashes. They were scouting systematically, learning the approaches to Timber Creek, and they were more organized than ordinary outlaws. These were men with military precision. As Silas crouched examining boot prints, a disturbing realization formed. The pattern, the discipline, the leader called the colonel, it all pointed to someone he'd known, someone from his past, someone who had reason to hate Lieutenant Silas Morgan of the 7th Cavalry Scouts. Silas returned to Timber Creek grim-faced and dusty from the trail. He headed straight for the sheriff's office, where Taylor and Mayor Collins were discussing watch rotations. "They're closer than we thought," Silas reported. 5 miles north, using the old trapper's cabin as a base. Taylor frowned. "Same 5 men, for now." Silas unfolded a rough map he'd drawn. "They're methodical, checking each approach, marking defensive positions, military tactics," Collins observed. "Yes." Silas hesitated, then added, "There's something else. A rider came while I was observing. Brought supplies and this." He placed a folded paper on the desk. Taylor opened it, his expression darkening. It was a wanted poster, crude but effective. The illustration showed a man with a prominent scar down his left cheek. "Colonel Isaiah Blackwood," he read aloud, "wanted for murder, theft, arson in 4 territories." Silas stared at the image, confirmation of his worst suspicion. "I know him." Both men looked up sharply. "During the war," Silas continued reluctantly, "Captain Isaiah Blackwood, under my command for a time, court-martialed after he ordered the execution of civilian prisoners." He pointed to the scar on the drawing. "I gave him that before they took him away, and now he's found you," Taylor said quietly. It's not coincidence they're here. Silas's voice was hard. He wants revenge, and the gold shipment is his opportunity. Collins paled. So we're facing not just outlaws, but a personal vendetta. We're facing a man who knows military strategy and has nothing to lose. Silas folded the map. We need to prepare the town. Now, a crowd had gathered outside, curious about Silas's return. Among them was Emma, her face lighting with relief when she saw him. The expression struck him like a physical blow, concern for his safety, joy at his return. Emotions he'd nearly forgotten existed. I need to speak with all able-bodied men, Silas announced. Town hall, 1 hour. As the crowd dispersed, Emma approached. You found something. It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway. Yes. Bad? Could be. He glanced around. Where's your father? Resting. Bennett's tonics help, but she didn't finish. You should eat before the meeting. I've soup at the store. Silas wanted to refuse, to focus solely on preparations, but the genuine concern in her eyes made it impossible. Thank you. In the store's back room, Emma served him soup and bread. As he ate, she sorted inventory, a familiar routine that now felt oddly domestic. I was worried, she said without looking up from her ledger. When you didn't return yesterday, had to be certain what we're facing. And are you? Certain. Silas set down his spoon. Yes, something in his tone made her turn. You know these men, their leader. He met her gaze. From the war. A man named Blackwood. The colonel, she whispered, connecting the pieces. He's dangerous, Emma. Smart, ruthless. Silas leaned forward. When he comes, it won't just be for gold. He'll want to destroy everything in his path. Emma's face paled, but her voice remained steady. Then we'll stop him. Together. Her conviction almost made him believe it possible. Almost. After finishing his meal, Silas headed for the town hall meeting. Emma walked with him partway. I should check on Pa, she said, turning toward the store. Emma, he called as she walked away. Be careful. Until this is over, be careful. She nodded, understanding the weight of his warning. The meeting was grim but productive. Silas outlined defense plans, assigned positions, arranged training for those who needed it. He was in his element, the lieutenant once more, leading men in preparation for battle. When he returned to his cabin that night, exhausted but focused, something felt amiss. The door was exactly as he'd left it, trapped with a single hair across the latch, his old habit from wartime. But inside, things had been moved. Subtly, professionally, but unmistakably. Someone had searched his cabin. Sleep eluded him. At dawn he headed back to town earlier than usual, a nagging worry driving him. The store was still closed, but a light burned upstairs. He knocked softly at the side door. Emma answered, already dressed, but hair still loose around her shoulders. Silas, what's wrong? Nothing, he said, suddenly feeling foolish. Just wanted to check. Come in, she interrupted, seeing something in his face. Pa's still sleeping. In the small kitchen, she poured coffee. Something's happened. Silas accepted the cup. Someone searched my cabin while I was gone. Her eyes widened. Blackwood's men? Possibly. Looking for what? Information. Confirmation that I'm here. He hesitated. They took nothing, but they went through everything. Emma set down her cup with a sharp click. My diary, she whispered. I went to the hiding place yesterday. It seemed different. Their eyes met in sudden understanding. You read it, she said, color rising in her cheeks. Before. That's why you've been different with me. Silas couldn't lie. Yes. And now they've read it too. Her voice trembled slightly. My private thoughts. About you. About us. The shame of his invasion of her privacy mixed with concern for what the outlaws might have learned. Personal details, vulnerabilities, dreams that could be used as weapons. Emma, I'm sorry, I never should have. It doesn't matter now, she cut him off, practical, despite her embarrassment. What matters is what they know. She looked away. About how I feel, about what you mean to me. The confession hung in the air between them. What you mean to me. Words he'd read in her diary but never expected to hear aloud. "I'll protect you," he promised. "All of you." "I know." She met his eyes again. "But who will protect you, Silas Morgan?" Harold's coughing echoed through the small apartment above the store. Bennett emerged from the bedroom, closing the door quietly behind him. "It's his heart now," he told Emma, his voice low. "The influenza weakened him too much." Silas stood by the window, watching the street below, where men were reinforcing the livery stable as a potential fallback position. 3 days had passed since the discovery that both his cabin and Emma's diary had been searched. "How long?" Emma asked, her face composed despite the tremor in her voice. Bennett sighed. "Hard to say. Days, perhaps a week. He's asking for you both." Harold lay propped against pillows, his face ashen but his eyes alert. He gestured for them to sit in the chairs positioned on either side of his bed. "No need for grave faces," he said, his voice threadbare but determined. "We all reach our time." "Pa," Emma began. "Let me speak while I have strength." Harold reached for a folded paper on his bedside table. "I've had Reverend Williams help me prepare this. My will." He handed it to Emma. "The store is yours, of course. Everything is." Emma took the document, her hands steady, though her eyes glistened. "There's one unusual provision," Harold continued, looking at Silas. "I've named you as Emma's protector should she accept such protection. A formal request, witnessed and legal." Silas straightened, surprised. "Sir, I'm not asking for promises," Harold interrupted. "Just making my wishes known. You're a good man, Silas Morgan. Better than you believe," he coughed, wincing. "The choice remains with both of you." Emma stood abruptly. "You should rest, Pa. Rest is coming soon enough," Harold replied with a sad smile. "Sit with me a while longer." They stayed until Harold dozed off, his breathing labored but steady. Outside his room, Emma finally allowed tears to fall, turning instinctively toward Silas. He hesitated only a moment before drawing her close, her head against his chest. "He's been preparing me for this," she whispered, "for months. He's a strong man, the strongest I've known." She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Until you came." Silas shook his head, uncomfortable with the comparison. "Your father built a life here, protected you, raised you. I'm just a man who ran from his past, and now that past has found you." Emma's gaze was direct. "Found us?" "Yes." Silas looked toward Harold's room. "Which is why I should leave. Draw Blackwood away from Timber Creek." "No." The word was sharp, definitive. "That's exactly what he wants. To isolate you. To separate you from anyone who might stand with you." Her hand found his arm. "We're stronger together. The whole town." Before Silas could respond, a commotion erupted from the street below. They moved to the window. Sheriff Taylor was striding toward the store, a man on horseback beside him. "Scout returning," Silas said, recognizing young Will Peterson, one of the men he'd sent to watch the passes. They hurried downstairs. Will's face was flushed with cold and exertion as he dismounted. "Mr. Morgan," he called, spotting Silas. "They're moving. All of them. 20, maybe 25 riders." "When?" "2 days, by my reckoning. They're gathering at the North Fork." Silas turned to Sheriff Taylor. "Signal the men. Full preparations." As the town mobilized, Silas returned upstairs with Emma. They found Harold awake, listening to the activity below. "It's starting, isn't it?" he asked. "Soon," Silas confirmed. Harold nodded, then motioned for Silas to come closer. "I need a moment alone with him, Emma," he said. When she had left, closing the door softly, Harold gripped Silas's wrist with surprising strength. "If the worst happens," he said, "get her away. Promise me. It won't come to that. Promise me." Harold's eyes were intense. "She'll stay to the last, because of me, because of the store. Don't let her." Silas nodded solemnly. "I promise. There's something else." Harold reached beneath his pillow and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "This was meant for Catherine before we married. never had a chance to give it to her. He opened the pouch, revealing a simple gold ring with a small sapphire. Not as fine as her wedding band, but it was all I could afford then. He pressed the pouch into Silas's hand. I've seen how you look at her, how she looks at you. Perhaps, when this is over. Silas closed his fingers around the ring, unable to speak. You don't have to say anything, Harold assured him. Just keep it safe, like you'll keep her safe. Later, as dusk settled over Timber Creek, Silas stood on the porch of his cabin, looking toward town. From here, he could see lights appearing in windows, men moving between buildings, preparations continuing under Sheriff Taylor's direction. He touched the ring in his pocket, feeling its weight, the weight of Harold's trust, of possible futures, of responsibilities he'd spent years avoiding. In 2 days, Blackwood would come. In 2 days, the life Silas had built in solitude would either end, or transform into something he'd never dared imagine, something he'd only read about in the private pages of Emma's diary. Dawn brought a letter. It was delivered by a terrified boy from a neighboring homestead who'd been paid in gold to carry it to Timber Creek. A man with a scar gave it to my pair, the boy explained, shivering despite the blanket Emma had wrapped around his shoulders. Said it's for Lieutenant Morgan. Silas took the sealed envelope. Sheriff Taylor, Mayor Collins and several other town leaders had gathered in the store at his summons. Emma stood behind the counter, tension evident in her posture. The letter was brief, written in a bold, slashing hand. Lieutenant Morgan, you took my command, my reputation, and my future. I've come to return the favor. However, I'm prepared to offer terms, you alone, at Dead Man's Ridge. Surrender yourself, and Timber Creek remains untouched. Refuse, and I'll burn your sanctuary to the ground. You have until sunrise tomorrow to decide. Colonel Isaiah Blackwood. Silas passed the letter to Sheriff Taylor without comment. You can't consider this, Emma said, reading the sheriff's expression. It's a trap, Taylor agreed, but it confirms they're close. Mayor Collins rubbed his face wearily. Could we negotiate, perhaps offer a portion of the gold shipment as passage? Blackwood doesn't want gold, Silas said flatly. He wants revenge, on you, Emma stated, for what happened during the war. Silas nodded, feeling the weight of past decisions. I led the testimony against him at his court-martial. His actions cost the lives of 17 civilians. The memories surfaced unwillingly, women and children among them. A heavy silence fell over the room. What are you thinking? Emma asked, watching him closely. That I need to check our defenses. Silas moved toward the door. And we need to move your father to the church. It's the most defensible building if they breach the town. The day passed in a flurry of preparation. Men reinforced barricades, positioned ammunition, and created fallback points throughout Timber Creek. Women prepared bandages, stored water, and secured essential supplies. Harold was carefully transferred to the church, where Dr. Bennett established a makeshift infirmary. He protested weakly, but the increasing frequency of his coughing spells betrayed his deteriorating condition. As dusk approached, Silas found Emma arranging blankets near her father's cot. You should try to rest, he said. Tomorrow will be difficult. I will if you will, she countered, straightening to face him. He almost smiled at that. Fair enough. Harold stirred, eyes opening. Silas, he called, voice barely audible. A word. Emma stepped away, giving them privacy. Silas sat beside the dying man. Tell me about Catherine, Silas said suddenly, surprising himself with the request. How you met? Harold's eyes brightened at the memory. Harvest Dance, 1836. She wore a blue dress that matched her eyes, just like Emma's. He smiled faintly. I was terrified to approach her, stood against the wall all evening, watching her dance with every man but me. What changed? She came to me, said if I wasn't going to ask, she would. He chuckled, the sound dissolving into a cough. Never met a woman so forward, so certain. He looked toward Emma, across the room, until her daughter. Silas followed his gaze. Emma was helping an elderly woman settle on a nearby pallet, her movements gentle but efficient. Don't waste time with regrets, son, Harold continued. War taught you caution, taught you loss. But there are other lessons worth learning. Before Silas could respond, Sheriff Taylor appeared at the church door, signaling urgently. With a reassuring nod to Harold, Silas rose and joined him outside. "Rider coming," Taylor reported. "Single man, white flag." They watched from the church steps as the horseman approached the town's makeshift barricade. Even in the fading light, the scar on his face was visible. "That's him," Silas confirmed. "Blackwood." The rider stopped 30 yards out. "Lieutenant Morgan," he called, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "Still hiding behind others, I see." Silas stepped forward, moving past the barricade, despite Taylor's warning hand. "I'm here, Blackwood." The scarred man smiled, an expression devoid of warmth. "So you are. Have you considered my offer?" "There's nothing to consider. Timber Creek is under my protection." Blackwood laughed. "Your protection? Like those civilians at Hatchet Creek were under your protection?" He leaned forward in his saddle. "I've studied you, Lieutenant. Followed your trail to this pathetic town. I know your weakness now." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a familiar leather-bound book. "Emma's diary. Touching," Blackwood continued, holding it up. "The lonely mountain man and the shopkeeper's daughter. 3 children, was it? Such dreams she has." His voice hardened. "Dreams that will die with her, unless you meet me alone, as instructed." Rage surged through Silas, cold and clarifying. "If you harm her, you'll what? You had your chance to kill me years ago. Instead, you chose the righteous path." Blackwood tucked the diary away. "Dawn, Lieutenant, Dead Man's Ridge. Alone." He wheeled his horse around. "Or I burn everything you love to ashes." As the rider disappeared into the gathering darkness, Silas felt a presence beside him. Emma stood there, face pale but resolute. "You heard?" he asked. She nodded. "He has my diary. I'm sorry, I should have." "It doesn't matter," she interrupted. "What matters is what you're planning." He met her eyes, knowing she could read his intent. "You can't go," she said, her voice low but intense. "It's suicide. If there's a chance to end this without risking the town, he'll kill you and attack anyway." Her hand found his arm. "He wants you isolated, alone. Don't give him what he wants." Inside the church, Harold's coughing echoed in the growing darkness. Time was running short on multiple fronts. "Promise me," Emma insisted. "Promise you won't face him alone." The sapphire ring weighed heavily in Silas's pocket as he covered her hand with his own. "I promise." False dawn painted the eastern horizon with pale light as Silas made his final rounds. Timber Creek had transformed overnight, windows boarded, barricades erected, defensive positions established throughout the small town. Sheriff Taylor had positioned men with rifles on rooftops. Others waited behind makeshift barriers, armed with whatever weapons they possessed. "Signal fires are ready," young Will Peterson reported, falling into step beside Silas. The boy, barely 17, had volunteered to light the warning beacons if the town was breached. One on the church tower, one at the mill, and one at the south ridge. Nearest settlement should see at least one. Silas nodded approval. "Remember, your job is to light them and get to safety. No heroics." "Yes, sir." Will hesitated. "Lieutenant Morgan, is it true what they're saying, that the man leading them was under your command? Once, long ago." Silas checked the loading of his Spencer rifle. "He made choices I couldn't abide. Like we're making choices now." Silas looked at the boy, surprised by the insight. "Yes, exactly like that." At the church, Dr. Bennett was checking supplies, while Emma arranged fresh bandages. Harold dozed fitfully on his cot, his breathing shallow and labored. "Any change?" Silas asked quietly. Bennett shook his head. "He's holding on, stubbornly, like his daughter," Silas observed. A ghost of a smile crossed the doctor's face. "Indeed. Speaking of whom," he nodded toward Emma, who had noticed Silas and was approaching. "Everything's ready," she said, her face composed, despite the dark circles beneath her eyes. She had refused to rest, working through the night alongside the other women preparing the church as both fortress and infirmary. "Emma," Silas began, "when they come, I know. Stay inside, away from windows. She straightened her apron with determined hands. But if we're overrun, I'll need a weapon. He started to protest, then remembered their training sessions, her quick learning, her steady hands. Without a word, he removed the Navy Colt from his belt and handed it to her. 6 shots, he said. Make them count. Their fingers brushed as she took the weapon, a fleeting contact that somehow carried more meaning than any words. She tucked the pistol into her apron pocket. Pear's been asking for you, she said. He's been in and out, but his mind is clear when he's awake. Harold's eyes opened as they approached his bedside. You didn't go, he whispered, relief evident in his voice. I'm here, Silas confirmed, kneeling beside the cot. Good. Harold's gaze shifted to his daughter. Emma, fetch my pipe from my coat. Won't smoke it, just want to hold it. When she had stepped away, Harold grasped Silas's wrist. She told me about Blackwood, about the diary. Silas nodded grimly. Listen carefully, Harold said, his voice suddenly stronger. If it comes to a choice between the town and Emma, I'll get her out. I promised you. No. Harold's grip tightened. She stays if she chooses to stay. You don't force her. She's her mother's daughter, stubborn as the mountain itself. He drew a labored breath. But if it comes to a choice between yourself and her, choose her. Every time. Promise me that. The request struck Silas like a physical blow. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts, the pounding of hooves. They're coming, Sheriff Taylor's voice rang out. North approach. Silas rose, torn between his duty to the town and his promise to Harold. Go, Harold urged. But remember what I said. Emma returned, her face pale but determined. They're here. Silas moved to the church door, where he could survey the town's northern edge. Riders were appearing from the tree line, first a few, then more, until at least 20 men on horseback had formed a line just beyond rifle range. At their center, astride a black stallion, sat Blackwood, his scarred face unmistakable even at a distance. Hold positions, Silas called to the defenders. Wait for my signal. Blackwood raised a hand, and his men halted. Lieutenant Morgan, he shouted. Last chance, surrender yourself, or we burn this town to the ground. Not going to happen, Blackwood. Silas responded, his voice carrying across the open space. Then their blood is on your hands. Blackwood turned to his men. Take the town. Kill everyone except Morgan and the Winters woman. They're mine. The riders surged forward, and Timber Creek erupted in gunfire. The first wave of attackers fell, but others pressed on, reaching the outer barricades. Men fought hand to hand where the barriers were breached, the clash of metal and cries of pain filling the cold morning air. Silas moved methodically, his rifle finding targets with deadly precision. Memories of other battles, other wars, threatened to overwhelm him, but he pushed them aside, focusing only on the defense of Timber Creek, on protecting what mattered. Lieutenant, Sheriff Taylor called from a nearby rooftop. They're circling around, east side. Silas turned to see 3 riders breaking away, heading toward the unprotected side of the church. Without hesitation, he sprinted to intercept them, knowing who they were targeting. Inside, Emma heard the approaching hoofbeat. She moved to her father's side, the Navy Colt now in her hand. Pa, she whispered, they're coming. Harold's eyes opened, surprisingly clear. Then we'll face them together, he said, as Winters always have. Glass shattered as a bullet struck the church window. Emma found them thus when she brought Harold's evening medicine, heads bent over the chessboard, expressions intent but relaxed. 2 men who understood each other. Should I leave you to your strategic battle? She asked, setting down a tray. Perfect timing, Harold replied. I was just about to concede defeat with dignity. As Emma tended to her father, Silas gathered the chess pieces, placing them carefully in their wooden box. His gaze lingered on her, the gentle efficiency of her movements, the tenderness with which she adjusted Harold's pillows, the quiet strength that had only deepened through recent trials. She caught him watching and smiled, a private expression meant only for him. Later, walking back to his cabin under a canopy of stars, Silas composed another entry for Harold's journal. Plans drawn today for the store expansion. First step of many. The cabin feels different now, not a refuge, but a temporary shelter. I find myself designing rooms in my mind, a kitchen with a large table, a study with bookshelves, a porch facing the sunrise, and yes, a place for small boots by the door. Spring advanced across the mountains with gentle snow retreated up the slopes. Wildflowers appeared in sudden bursts of color, and the creek swelled with snowmelt, its voice changing from winter's whisper to spring's confident song. Silas worked steadily on the store expansion, the rhythmic sound of his hammer marking the days. Other men from town joined the effort. Sheriff Taylor when his duties allowed, young Will Peterson after school, even Dr. Bennett between patients. What might have taken weeks was completed in days through shared labor. The loading dock was finished first, allowing for easier delivery of the spring shipments. The storeroom followed, with sturdy shelves and a reinforced floor that wouldn't need repair for decades. Silas built each element with meticulous care, as if securing not just boards and nails, but something far more precious. Emma watched the transformation with quiet pride, bringing coffee to the workers, offering suggestions, her presence a constant reminder of why the work mattered. If her hand occasionally brushed Silas's when passing tools, if their eyes held contact a moment longer than necessary, the townspeople pretended not to notice, though Harold, observing from his chair by the window, missed nothing. One evening as Silas was finishing for the day, Emma approached with a small package. "This came for you," she said. "From Denver." Silas wiped his hands on a cloth before accepting it. "I'm not expecting anything." The courier said it was important. He opened the package carefully. Inside was a letter from the territorial marshal and a small wooden box. The letter explained that among Blackwood's possessions, they had found items belonging to various victims. Among them, Emma's diary. Silas lifted the book from the box, its leather cover scratched, but intact. "Your diary," he said, offering it to Emma. The marshal returned it. Her eyes widened as she took it, fingers tracing the familiar binding. "I never thought I'd see it again." She looked up at him. "Have you?" "No," he assured her quickly. "I wouldn't, not again." A small smile touched her lips. "Even though you've already read it once?" Heat rose in his neck. "That was, I shouldn't have. Perhaps not." She turned the diary in her hands. "But I'm not sorry you did." Her voice lowered. "It saved me having to find the courage to tell you myself." Before Silas could respond, Harold called from the doorway where he sat in his wheeled chair. "If you two are finished whispering, I could use some help inside." That night in his cabin, Silas sat at his workbench, hands moving with practiced precision over pieces of wood. By lamplight he carefully shaped 3 small figures, a horse, a bear, and a bird. He worked from memory, recalling toys his grandfather had carved for him long ago. Each figure took shape beneath his knife, the horse with flowing mane, the bear reared on hind legs, the bird with wings spread as if in flight. He sanded them smooth, checked their edges for splinters, then aligned them on the bench. 3 wooden toys, 3 small, tangible acknowledgments of a future he was finally ready to embrace. The next morning, Silas rode to a neighboring settlement on an errand he'd been planning for weeks. There, he found Emma's diary had been placed on his saddle while he packed his horse. A folded paper marked a page within. He hesitated, then opened to the marked spot. It was a new entry, the ink still fresh, dated the previous night. "I've decided that if dreams are worth having, they're worth pursuing openly. No more hiding feelings between these pages. Silas returned my diary today, restored by the marshal from Blackwood's possessions. I saw in his eyes what I've hoped to see for so long. Not just respect or friendship, but something deeper. Still, he holds. Perhaps he needs to know that while I've dreamed of a future with him, I would never press for more than he's ready to give. That one child would be a blessing beyond measure. that a small cabin would be a palace if shared with him, that my heart is patient, even when my pen is not. Yet I stand by what I wrote before. I still see 3 children in our future, still imagine their laughter filling rooms we build together, still believe the lone wolf of Timber Creek has found his way home, even if he hasn't fully admitted it to himself. Silas closed the diary, emotions warring within him, gratitude for her patience, admiration for her courage, and a deepening certainty about his next steps. When he returned that evening, he carried a special order Emma had requested weeks ago, fine paper and drawing supplies from Denver, but he also carried something she hadn't requested, resolve, and a vision of the future as clear as the mountain air after rain. Harold was on the porch when Silas arrived, bundled against the evening chill but determined to enjoy the spring twilight. "Successful journey?" he asked, as Silas dismounted. "Very." Silas handed him a package of tobacco, a small luxury the doctor had reluctantly approved. Harold accepted it with a nod of thanks. "And did you find what you were looking for, beyond my tobacco?" Silas met the older man's knowing gaze. "I believe I did." "Good." Harold tamped tobacco into his pipe, movements deliberate despite trembling hands. "Emma's inside, updating her inventory. Probably writing in that diary too, now that she has it back." Silas hesitated at the door, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. "She hasn't given up on you, you know," Harold said quietly. "Not once in all these years." "I know." Silas adjusted the packages in his arms. "I don't deserve that kind of faith. None of us do." Harold struck a match, the flame illuminating his weathered face. "That's what makes it precious." Timber Creek's spring celebration arrived on a perfect day. Blue skies, gentle breezes, and the scent of pine mingling with wildflowers. The town gathered in the square, tables laden with food, musicians tuning instruments on a makeshift stage. After the darkness of winter and the terror of Blackwood's attack, the community embraced the festivity with particular enthusiasm. Harold insisted on attending despite his fragile health. "Can't miss the first celebration where my daughter might actually dance," he told Doc Bennett, who reluctantly agreed to the outing provided Harold remained in his wheeled chair with blankets against the spring chill. Emma wore a blue dress that matched her eyes, her hair arranged more elaborately than usual, adorned with a single wildflower. She moved through the crowd with quiet grace, accepting compliments on the store's new addition, deflecting well-meaning inquiries about her father's health, and trying not to watch the entrance to the square too obviously. Silas arrived later than most, having returned to his cabin to change into his one good shirt after finishing last-minute repairs to the church steps. Conversations paused briefly as he entered, then resumed with increased vigor. His role in defending the town had elevated him from respected outsider to something approaching local hero, a status that still made him uncomfortable. Mayor Collins intercepted him with a firm handshake. "Fine day for a celebration, Morgan." Indeed. Silas's eyes scanned the gathering, finding Emma across the square where she stood with her father. "Town council's been talking," Collins continued, "about making your position official. Town marshal maybe. Sheriff Taylor's getting on in years. Could use the help." Silas's attention snapped back to the mayor. "I'm not one for badges, just think on it." Collins clapped him on the shoulder. "You've earned a place here. More than earned it." The music began, fiddles, guitar and harmonica playing, a lively tune that drew couples to the center of the square. Silas made his way to where Harold sat watching the dancers, Emma beside him. "Mr. Morgan," Harold greeted with a knowing smile. "Just in time." Emma turned, her expression brightening. "Silas, you came. Wouldn't miss it." He shifted awkwardly, then extended his hand. "Would you care to dance, Miss Winters?" A murmur rippled through nearby onlookers. In 7 years, Silas Morgan had never participated in town dances. Emma placed her hand in his. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Morgan." As he led her to the dancing area, Silas was acutely aware of the eyes following them, of Harold's satisfied expression, of the warmth of Emma's hand in his. The music slowed obligingly to a waltz, and he drew her into the formal hold he hadn't used since before the war. "You dance well," she observed, as they moved among the other couples. "Another hidden talent." "Been a long time," he admitted. "Military balls. Another life." They circled the square, finding their rhythm together. Emma followed his lead with natural grace, her dress swirling around her ankles, her eyes never leaving his face. "I found my diary on my saddle yesterday," she said softly, "and the marked page. I shouldn't have read it." "Yes, you should have." Her directness surprised him. "I left it there for you to find, because there are things that need saying, Silas. Things I've only had the courage to write, not speak." The music continued around them, but they had slowed almost to stillness, the conversation demanding their full attention. "Emma, please," she interrupted gently, "let me finish. I've watched you these past months, seen how you've changed, how you've opened yourself to possibilities I don't think you ever imagined." Her voice lowered. "I've dreamed of a future with you, written about it, hoped for it. But I need to know if you share that dream, even a small part of it." The question hung between them, honest and unavoidable. Around them, other dancers continued their circuits. The music swelled, but they stood in a quiet island of their own making. Silas took a deep breath. "I've spent years believing I didn't deserve happiness, that the things I'd done, the men I'd lost, somehow disqualified me from a normal life." He tightened his hold on her hand. "But then I found your diary, read your dreams, and something inside me, something I thought had died during the war, started to wake up." Emma's eyes glistened. "And now I find myself designing a house in my mind, plotting gardens, carving toys." His voice roughened, "thinking about names for children." A single tear escaped, trailing down her cheek. "3 of them," she whispered, half teasing despite her emotion. "At least," he replied solemnly, then added with the hint of a smile, "if you'll have me." Instead of answering, Emma rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. A gentle, brief kiss, but there in front of the entire town. When she pulled back, applause erupted around them, led by Harold from his place of honor. Reverend Williams approached, carrying a family Bible bound in worn leather. "I've been saving this," he told them, his eyes twinkling, "for just such an occasion. Every family needs solid foundations." He pressed the heavy book into Silas's hands. Pages in the middle for recording marriages, births, important milestones. As the celebration continued around them, Silas and Emma stood together, the Bible between them, a tangible symbol of foundations yet to be laid, pages waiting to be filled. 1 year later, autumn painted the mountains in gold and crimson, as Timber Creek prepared for a wedding. The general store closed early, a hand-lettered sign in the window announcing the special occasion. Townspeople streamed toward the white church, dressed in their finest, carrying small gifts and covered dishes for the celebration to follow. Inside the church, Silas stood at the altar beside Reverend Williams, unrecognizable from the solitary man who had arrived in Timber Creek 8 years before. His new suit fit well, his face cleanly shaven, his eyes clear and focused on the church door. Sheriff Taylor, now officially retired with Silas serving as town marshal, clapped him on the shoulder. "Steady, son, not too late to run for the hills." The jest carried no weight. Everyone knew Silas Morgan had found his home. The music began, Miss Hitterson at the organ, joined by 2 fiddlers. The doors opened, and Emma appeared on Harold's arm. Her dress was simple but elegant, adorned with lace from her mother's wedding gown. Harold, thin but determined, had insisted on walking his daughter down the aisle despite Dr. Bennett's concerns. "Some moments," he declared, "are worth spending whatever strength remains." Each step was measured, deliberate. Emma matched her pace to her father's, her face radiant with a joy that touched everyone present. When they reached the altar, Harold placed Emma's hand in Silas's, then took his seat in the front pew, breathing heavily but smiling with profound satisfaction. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. Reverend Williams spoke of foundations built on solid ground, of love tested by fire and found unbreakable. When the time came for rings, Silas placed Catherine's wedding band on Emma's finger, the ring Harold had shown him that day in the store, now polished to a warm glow. "I do," Emma said clearly, her voice carrying to the rafters. "I do," Silas echoed, his deeper tone resonant with certainty. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder," Reverend Williams pronounced. "You may kiss your bride." Their kiss was gentle, reverent, yet held the promise of passion. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers led by young Will Peterson, now apprenticed to Silas in both his martial duties and carpentry work. The celebration spilled from the church to the town square, where tables groaned under the weight of food and lanterns were strung for dancing that would continue into the night. Harold held court from a cushioned chair, accepting congratulations and watching the festivities with the contented air of a man whose most cherished wish had been fulfilled. As dusk approached, Silas helped Emma into their wagon. Their new home waited, a sturdy cabin built with his own hands on land near the creek, close enough to town for convenience, but private enough for a family's first roots. Harold embraced them both before they departed. "Be happy," he whispered. "That's all I've ever wanted for you, Emma. For both of you now." "We will, Pa," Emma promised, kissing his weathered cheek. "We'll see you tomorrow for Sunday dinner. I'll be waiting," he assured them, though all three knew his days were numbered, each one now a precious gift. The ride to their new home was short, but meaningful. Their first journey as husband and wife. Silas had insisted Emma not see the finished cabin until today, wanting to surprise her with the details he'd incorporated from her diary's description. As they crested the final rise, the cabin came into view, sturdy logs gleaming in the late afternoon light, smoke curling from the stone chimney where he'd lit a fire earlier, blue door facing east to catch the sunrise, wildflowers planted along the path, nodded in the gentle breeze. "It's perfect," Emma breathed, her hand tightening on his arm. "Exactly as I imagined." Silas helped her down from the wagon, then paused before opening the door. "There's something you should see first." He led her to the porch, where 3 pairs of small boots stood neatly by the door, one slightly larger than the others, all crafted by his own hands. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she knelt to touch them. "3," she whispered. "A promise," Silas explained, his voice rough with emotion. "For the future we'll build together." She rose and turned to him, love shining in her eyes. "The future I dreamed of, the one you found in my diary, the one we'll write together," he corrected gently, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Inside, the cabin waited warm, welcoming, filled with possibilities, a home for a family not yet complete, but already bound by love that had survived war, solitude, danger, and doubt, to emerge stronger than either had dared to hope. Later that night, as Emma slept beside him, Silas took out Harold's journal, now their family record, and made a new entry. "Today I married Emma Winters. The lone wolf has found his pack, his purpose, the mountain still doesn't care if a man is cold, but I am no longer alone against the winter. Whatever comes next, children, challenges, joys, sorrows, we face together, and that makes all the difference."